expression of opposition through the vote tomorrow, it will not necessarily lead to change within the country. I think
now another possible avenue for change to come to the country is if, it's a big if here, if Myanmar opens its doors to international aid workers and organizations and allow them in. That could lead to international dialogue. But really, what's the likelihood of that taking place?
Again, the likelihood is limited. First, the big question is whether they will allow foreign aid personnel into the country. That's one question. And they may not do that. So that ends the discussion right there and then. But in terms of international dialogue, well, Myanmar has engaged in international dialogue. It does talk with India, with China, with countries in Southeast Asia. It's international dialogue with Western Europe and with the United States that has been lacking. And what the cyclone and its aftermath has shown is that those countries with whom Myanmar has been speaking were able to at least provide aid, if not personnel, aid to the country quite easily. It's those countries that have been frozen out.
Right. Quite recently, China, and you mentioned China just then, China has urged Myanmar to engage with the international community. Now, Beijing has been a very close and influential friend with the so-called Hermit Kingdom. Do you think Myanmar would listen to China and be better engaged with the international community? If
that were to happen, I think, as you mentioned, China does have some leverage over the country, but even that may be quite limited in the sense that Myanmar sells oil and gas to China, so China depends on Myanmar to a certain extent. But if the government decides not to listen to China, it's not necessarily clear that China will take severe action against Myanmar. So if China is not prepared to take that severe action, then China's leverage over that country and over that government would be actually fairly limited. It is a large neighbor, it's an important economic partner, but it's the question of to what extent is the Chinese government prepared to play the role of a policeman when it comes to Myanmar. And there's no indication just yet that China is prepared to play that particular role.
Well, it sounds like political change is very unlikely to happen in Myanmar. Unfortunately, Amarjeet, we're going to have to leave it at that, but thank you for sharing your insights with us. Amarjeet Singh joining us live from London there. Now up next, the death toll in Myanmar could well rise even more. We will take a look at the conditions that came together to make Cyclone Nargis just so deadly. "22,000 people died when Cyclone Nargis struck last weekend. A U.S. official says the toll could be as high as 100,000. Tens of thousands are missing. Hundreds of thousands are displaced and destitute, and malnutrition and disease are growing fears as aid supplies trickle in ever so slowly. The tropical cyclone struck with a force equal to a Category 4 hurricane. Now, that's stronger than 2005's Hurricane Katrina in the U.S. Winds reached 240 kilometers an hour as it barreled through the Irrawaddy Delta and Yangon, the capital. The 10-hour onslaught dumped more than 50 centimeters of rain. Now, dozens of tropical cyclones pass across Asia every year, but most of them don't cause destruction on the scale that Nargis has. Our CNN meteorologist Bonnie Schneider walks us through why this storm was so deadly.
It's not unusual for a tropical cyclone to hit the northern Indian Ocean this time of year, but tropical cyclone Nargis will be remembered as one of the deadliest this region has ever seen. On April 27th, low pressure formed in the Bay of Bengal, and conditions were ripe for this storm to quickly develop as it crossed the bay and worked its way across Myanmar. At maximum winds of 200+ kilometers per hour, this proved to be a major cyclone that made a direct path over the Myanmar region. Now, it's very important to know where the storm hit really made a difference in the impact it had. Notice the peninsula has many inlets. When the water pooled up into these inlets, it really didn't have any place to go. This low-lying area and the narrow inlets only enhanced the storm surge. To make matters worse, the population in the Irrawaddy Peninsula was very, very dense. In fact, in some areas per square kilometer, we saw conditions of people living in this region over 1,000 people per square kilometer. So it's a very densely populated area, and the path took the storm directly through that region. Well, what did it look like? This is what it looked like about March 2004 when you look at this picture taken from the satellite perspective, courtesy of NASA. And with that storm surge and with that intense flooding, things really did change. This picture was taken on May 5th, and you could see the flooding sweeping all the way inland as we saw the storm surge incredibly work its way across southern Myanmar. With a special look at Tropical Cyclone Nargis, I'm meteorologist Bonnie Schneider.
These people are the victims of Cyclone Nargis. This Catholic church school has been transformed into a refugee camp. They are the few fortunate enough to have escaped one of the hardest hit regions in the Irrawaddy Delta. They made the journey to this village by foot, car and by truck, hoping to find shelter, food and safety. Most arrived here naked. The church school has been giving them clothes, basic medical assistance for their injuries, and 1 bowl of rice a day. A church worker complained that 6 days after the cyclone, there's been no sign of help from the government or local authorities. They are relying heavily on the goodwill and generosity of this small community that narrowly escaped Cyclone Nargis. This woman invited us into her home. She wanted to share her frustrations. She told me it's more important to help the people than fear the government. She said it has not provided, so it's up to communities to step in. The Catholic school says it's expecting more cyclone victims to pour in here. It's wondering how long they can continue providing for the people. Al Jazeera, the Irrawaddy Delta, Myanmar.
Well, the official death toll has remained at around 22,500 people, but the British ambassador to Myanmar, Mark Canning, told us the real figure is likely to be much higher.
The scale of this catastrophe is becoming clear all the time. The official death toll is around 23,000, but I'm afraid it's going to escalate fairly dramatically in the coming days. There are between 1 and 1.5 million people who are thought to be vulnerable. And the conditions are horrendous. So you're talking about a relief operation, I think twice the size of the Aceh relief operation. Some aid is getting through. I met with a number of NGOs today who are doing fantastic work. Some UN and other flights, World Food Programme convoys are getting through, but they're not getting through nearly fast enough, nor in the volume that is needed.
Well, it's estimated that more than 100,000 people are dead and another 1.5 million hopeless. Regardless, the rulers are still planning to hold a referendum on Saturday. Veronica Petrosa has this report.
No water, no food, no shelter, and worst of all, no help. These people have lost everything. International agencies say as many as 1 million people are at severe risk. There is help out there, but it's not getting through. USAID has ships packed and ready to go. They could offer a lifeline to survivors. Instead, they wait for permission to enter Myanmar. Every day the government delays, aid workers say conditions for thousands of people get even worse, even life-threatening. The US has always been a harsh critic of Myanmar's military regime, isolating it with sanctions, new ones imposed just last week. Now the US wants access to send in its military to help cyclone victims.
We're outraged by the slowness of the response of the government of Burma to welcome and accept assistance. It's clear that the government's ability to deal with the situation, which is catastrophic, is limited.
In the low-lying Irrawaddy Delta, roads were washed away and the infrastructure's in tatters. Large swathes of the region are underwater, accessible only by air, something the US military is well equipped to do. US diplomats are pushing hard and in public to try to get them in. Cyclone Nargis caused a storm surge of up to 4.5 meters. As it struck, it picked up everything in its path. 6 days later, and bodies are being discovered miles from villages. And as they lie rotting in fields, the threat of disease grows. So the chorus of international concern is growing louder.